You are listening to Eastmans Fly Cast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastmans Fly Cast for you. So today is part 2 of the Brian Rosenberg podcast. Brian Rosenberg, local Ennis guy, met him about 20 years ago in the fly shop, and he's been honing his craft and sharpening his skills for the last 20 years. He just has such great insight into fly fishing and into fish, the insect hatches, the dry flies. He's just a great guy, and he really articulates it well on the podcast. So this one was really fun for me. We went a touch long. He's just got so much great information. I was enjoying the conversation so much. So had to break it up into 2 parts. This is the second part. Again, thanks for Brian coming on and sharing so much great information. You can find him at Montana Fishman on IG, on Facebook. He also has a website at Montana Fishman. He has a blog on there, some different things he does. But he's a great follow and a great fisherman, and I really appreciate him being on. I also want to thank Eastmans for their support of the podcast. Make sure to check out everything we have going on over there at Eastmans. We have the hunting podcast, Eastmans Elevated. This week I have Travis Nowotny on, just one of those blue-collar, consistently successful guys. Harvests a ton of animals every year with his bow, including this year a giant chocolate-faced black bear with his bow, spot and stock early, tells a story. It's just amazing. And last year he harvested 3 mule deer with his bow. It's just every year after year, Travis comes up with these trophies. So great in-depth conversation. And make sure to check out everything we got going on over there at Eastmans. We've got the magazines, Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal, Eastman's Hunting Journal, videos beyond the grid on YouTube, a few of my hunts on there. We also have Eastman's Outdoor TV on the Outdoor Channel. So make sure to check out everything we have going on over there at Eastman's, and thanks to their support on the podcast. So let's get right into this. The second part of Brian Rosenberg, Eastman's Fly Cast. Here we go.
Oh, and especially in the spring, like when we look at, being super excited about the summer, which that's our dry fly season. Like we definitely want to push the boundaries. Like we want to be like fishing dries in late March, and in warm, droughty kind of years we can be doing that, right? And the midging and all that, we actually can fish dries 365. But when we think about it as a dawn to dusk or any time in between, that really is our summer fishing. So those little windows where all of a sudden that fish has to ignore keeping an eye out for a sculpin or a leech or something because there's bugs. Like those are pretty fleeting moments, and sometimes they last 3 or 4 hours. I mean, one of my highlight March Brown days was with Matt Carey, and it's going back to like 06 or 07, right? And I've had great fishing since then on that bug, but we're in some of that water a couple miles up from town, and we just keep swapping back and forth. How did you get one? Yeah, rose 4, and go back to the boat and grease up and maybe change the fly and just swap positions. He went to where I went, and I went over to where he was, and it was like 4 or 5 hours of it, right? And that's like, so we're like, that's now my bar. Like, so if I'm chasing it, like I'm looking for that day. I may never see that day again in my life, and I'm going to be happy to catch 1 or 10 or nothing, but like those are those days that all of a sudden like that bar is set, and then with the dry fly thing, it is fleeting for some of those fish, some of those certain fish, definitely in the early part of the season. Madison centric, Madison specific, I think as we get into summertime, those fish, I think if it's in the right place at the right time, they come up. Like, I don't know how many times I run a dropper up my leader a lot. And this is an old, it's an older style trick.
Wait a sec. So you run your smaller fly up top?
Yeah, I run it about 5 feet up from the leader. So a lot of this for me does come from Dave Scully again, and then it's reinforced by guys who learned it and also have used it and kind of just
yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Walk me through the setup real quick.
So salmon flies are great. We'll just talk salmon flies for a second. So you want to fish a salmon fly, so do I. And we might want to get that salmon fly really tight to structure, like especially if we're through Varney, right? And it's overhanging banks and the trees. And if I throw a dropper, so if it, nymph, dry, whatever that trailer fly is, if I run that off the hook bend or off the eye, it doesn't matter, that fly is going to hang up. If I'm trying to place a salmon fly an inch off of grass or get it in the grass and like tug it, right, and it drops in sometimes, we can't do that with that trailer.
You're spot on. That's why
Yeah.
I don't run a dropper, because I want to fish that salmon fly hard towards the bank. Yeah.
So if you know that you're going to get some extra fish, so it's all like, that's what it becomes. It becomes that it's extra fish, but it's also like for those fish that are going to not eat my salmon fly, because there's a lot of stuff happening during that time, right? So I used to do it as a blood knot tag. But then if you change flies on that dropper tag a bit, so it wouldn't be that indifferent from running a couple nymphs, and you have your heaviest nymph at the bottom, and then you have a light little emerger up on a surgeon's knot or a blood knot.
I see. Okay. Off the tag of a blood knot. Okay, I got it. So it's up. How far from your salmon fly, you think?
It depends, 5 feet, 4 feet.
Oh, wow, so a long
way
ways
up. Yeah. And I don't fish super long leaders. Like I fish a
don't
lot of 8 to 9 foot leaders.
Okay.
If I'm fishing really tiny dries, late summer and slicks, I will go over to a 10 or 11 foot leader so people can, slack it in the slick, like Harvey style, like what's his name? Harvey slack leaders. They're just long, and so it all piles up in a slick, and then as that slick drifts away and pulls all the slack out, that little fly floats for longer. Don't do that too much. It's hard to turn over here, right? We have a lot of wind. Sometimes it's out of the north in the summer, and a 12 or 14 foot leader is hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me to turn over, honestly. So big bug, hopper, salmon fly, nocturnal stonefly, squalla, whatever the big bug happens to be for that time period. And then I don't even do the blood knot trailer. So I do tie a lot of my own leaders, and I do that because I like a specific leader. It helps my customers. It helps people learn to cast, turn flies over well. I just actually take whatever tippet I'd be fishing, and I just clinch knot it above the blood knot.
Okay.
So it can move around a little bit. I use Maxima because it's stiffer. That stiffness helps keep it from winding around the leader. There are days the wind just makes that trailer wrap too much on the leader, and you get rid of that. In that fashion, you get rid of the dropper up the leader. But when we're searching for fish, and we're trying to play an option that they might eat other than the salmon fly, so we want to pick up a few extra bites. But we still really want to be fishing the salmon fly or the hopper, whatever it is. Now that hopper or the salmon fly is still my main focus. I can get that in tight to cover. I can get it drifting under overhanging twigs, right on a rock face, in the shallowest spot, or wherever those places that I think it should be. Out from that, 3 feet, 4 feet away, is a little caddis floating. And in the early days, it definitely takes a bit of doing it to gain the confidence. But over the years, I've seen enough 17 to 21-inch fish come up and eat a fly 6 inches off of or 5 inches off of 40-pound, right? They don't really care. Like if it's in the spot and they think it's good, they'll come up if that's what they want, right? And so I run my trailers up my leader a lot if I'm running 2 flies. It turns over like a single dry for people, so it's typically easy to present. If I have a fly that I know they're eating pretty well, but say I'm teaching someone to cast, so we're putting a trimmed up chubby, we're putting some super buoyant, like mend it, sink it, I don't care. We'll get a little slack to it and it's going to pop up and float. I can run that sneaky little bug, whether it be like a rusty spinner, our PMD spinner is all July. That's an impossible bug to see. It's okay to fish it wet behind a regular big dry if you're out in the middle. Then it doesn't matter so much. But like structure fishing, that fly, whether it's a caddis, an ant. Well, in summertime for me, the ant is up the leader all day long, all day, every day. And if all of a sudden the hopper's running away across the surface of the water, just lift. It might be a 10-inch fish, but it ate the ant, right? And then sometimes they're actually good fish are coming up and grabbing it. That also starts to help us search. So the searching part of that is really what like Scully instilled in the early days. every rock, there's patterns, right, in fishing, hunting. Critters want to be in certain places at certain times, or maybe pressure pushes them to a certain place, or because bugs are happening, they're way up shallow, or a good one for us is rocks, right? It's a giant pocket water river, so we have big rocks all over the place, medium-sized rocks. And every rock has a bit of a depression or a dish off its side. Some fish are stacked. They might be stacked in tight underneath the rock. Some fish might be in the bottom of that side depression. Some fish might be on the main river side, so where that depression or little bucket next to a rock actually starts to taper back up to main bottom. So that long leader, if we want to see where fish are on a given rock, I can have a front angler fish lead fly to the absolute shoulder, tight to the shoulder, and then the trailer, because it's 4 feet away from that, might be over the bucket or out on that other tapering edge. And depending on where fish come out of, then we run that on the next rock, and we run it on the next rock, and we run it on the next rock. And so then all of a sudden, okay, well, today fish are actually in the bucket. They're not tight to the rock. They're not eating anything tight to the rock. So then you can move that whole setup. So the big fly is over the bucket. Now the little fly might not be in great water. It might be over no structure drop or anything like that. It might not be on a shallowing edge. And then it's just, that's that pattern. Sometimes that pattern lasts a week. Sometimes it lasts a day. But that was one of the other main reasons, like he used to talk about. That's why we would fish that. And when we're talking rocks, upstream side of the rock for me is the head. Mm-hmm. The sides of the rock are the shoulder, and then the butt or the tail of the rock is basically the start of the slick or all of that. The slick is the pocket. And certain rocks with two anglers, so if I can get my front angler to focus downstream and throw towards, their near edge or near shoulder, on a mid-sized rock, I can have the back angler actually angle and throw the big fly out to the main river side of the pocket, and the little fly might float close to the rock. So with one pass, we can be fishing 4 different positions on a rock. Big rocks, we can't quite do that because we can't get an angler to the other side. And when we get through the bucket, front angler picks up and throws to the slick. As the back angler comes in, he gets to, or she gets to throw to the slick. So it's a great way sometimes to figure out what patterns might be developing in terms of where they would be that day. And then sometimes it doesn't matter. Like, one rock eats next to the rock and the next one it eats in the bucket. So it's a way to kind of get coverage. And then windy days, just throw that out because it does tangle that rig a bit. But so that's again, one of those things that, luckily someone did it before me and was willing to share it, right? It's like,
oh, I love that, Brian. I have never tried that, and I've never seen it. But I love, your description of searching around those rocks because it is, you're trying to find where they're at on the given day that you're fishing. Now, you get a lot of information because you're out on the water every single day, but a lot of times when I'm just touching that river once a week or a couple times a week. So when I get out there to find where those fish are holding on that rock, whether it's the shoulder, the head, or the that's it really helps me in fishing. And like you say, having that spread out 4 or 5 feet, when I'm fishing a dropper, usually I'm fishing 12, 18 inches, maybe 20 inches at the most. So I'm not really getting 2 different lanes as I'm going down because those fish seem to compress as they cast and drift down. The way you have it set up, they're totally spread out where you're getting 2 different lanes of fishing. And with that ant, I love that ant because the ant fish is so good late summer, the terrestrials. Yeah, so having that in a different lane like that, gosh, that's got to be crazy effective for you being able to dial in where those fish are sitting and where they want to eat that day. What a great idea.
Well, and if, say, 2 or 3 out of 4 fish come up and eat the upper leader fly, just cut it off and put it on the end if it's something someone can see, right? Then we can just go back to one fly. Sometimes there's not. Like sometimes there's times where I might run a cripple or something up the leader, and I just know another one would be like a LaFontaine's caddis, like an old school pupa caddis, right? That thing is impossible to see. It works as a trailer great if you're out middle river. So in that upper portion of the river where, in boats we do fish the middles a lot. It for me, it doesn't matter at that point if it's off the back or up the leader, because it's kind of in that nymphing film. It's not truly fishing a dry, but there's caddis around and there's pupa around. But I'll still kind of run that up the leader sometimes. Just turning over 2 flies for people can be difficult in the early days. It can be difficult for a good angler on a windy day or on a north windy day. And one thing we see a lot of in the summer, oddly enough, is sort of puffy north wind, and that's on the Madison. If for folks not unfamiliar, it's running north for the most part. So north wind for us is a headwind. It's a bit difficult to throw in. Tailwinds, south winds are better for the angler, tougher on the rower because it wants to speed us up a bunch. But from a presentation or get it downstream standpoint, south wind is better. But so say if I run that double dry connected to the bend, I want that separation. So I'm then going to go arm's length to nose, right? And that's a 3-foot easy dropper. And then that's, it's piled and they're right next to each other and there's a lot of lifting and things like that to get them separated. And it can be difficult. It can be almost frustrating on certain days just from a casting standpoint. Mm-hmm. So that whole system of having that big bug, as the point or the end fly and then running a little bug up the leader is good. And then again, I run it like the ant for me is, I start fishing and not to give away secrets, but I start checking on ants in July, early July. Like I'll run it on a rod for half a day to see what we see. There are days when it's just an in-between kind of day and it might work. It usually is late July, from that standpoint, from a terrestrial standpoint. But there's like another sneaky terrestrial season around here that no one thinks about. And it took me catching fish and having them puke and things like that in the boat to realize that it was happening. Prior to our, that squalla thing here, we get warm weather. And the first things that we see are pollinators. We see bees, we see beetles, we see ants. Those are all the bugs that happen that are coming out of hibernation in early to mid-April. It's never going to be a banner day, but those generic little dry flies that could be all of those. It could be a squalla, but it could very easily be a little beetle or a big pollinator bee. Those can sometimes get eaten well enough that, they can keep a person busy fishing them, or at least fishing them with a small nymph underneath so they can fish a shallow riffle with it or something. But that one came into focus. Fishing with a good buddy, Stuart Lewis. This is maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, and we were in under Varney above town looking for squallas and blue wings and that kind of stuff. And we're fishing a little a PMX, the Parachute Madam X, which was another great little fly that came out in the early 2000s. Peacock colored, so it's sort of everything. It's a housefly, it's a beetle, it's a squalla, it's whatever a fish wants it to be. Hook a decent fish in a spot that we call Leon's Corner, kind of by the highway corner where 287 runs up to VC.
Okay.
That little complex of islands down in there. And, net the fish, kind of, have it sitting in the net, get the hook out, and it's flopping. It throws up a bunch of stuff. And it happens to land on my tray, or on my bench seat tray. And there isn't river insect, aquatic insect one in there. There's a dozen snails. There's 6 bees.
6 bees, huh?
Bees, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
like honeybees, yeah. And it's at that time dandelions are out, all of that stuff is out, right? And so those are the first things that kind of wake up. And it had ants, half a dozen or 8 ants, 5 or 6 beetles.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm missing something here. This is, and I had to kind of sit back and really think about it. I'm like, well, why would that fish eat those things, right? Well, A, they're on the water. B, it's a time period where we're switching from winter fishing. So certain days the midge hatches are not great. There's not blue wings. That's the same time period, we can dredge a black rubber leg on the bottom and catch good fish because they're being opportunistic about everything. And then it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm out. I see beetles fly across the river. I see bees flying around, and it's never going to be an astounding fishery like at that point, like that early terrestrial dry fly fishing, but just an eye opener to what's possible, right? Like,
and it doesn't take many fish to make a good day too, especially if you're catching them on top like that. Yeah, how cool, man! What great insight into what those fish are eating. I never would have thought that, and I never would have thought to fish terrestrials that time of year. Yeah, that's wild, man.
I'm not saying like I would put on a tried and true hopper, but it's sort of like that. Maybe it's just okay to try a dry dropper a little sooner than we might think, right? And then there we go and do that, and we can't catch fish one. So yeah, we throw a bobber and girdle bug, Pat's rubber leg, whatever we want to call it, and and a good dropper, and get a couple bites, and then then go back to pounding the head against the wall.
Right.
So
well, I loved what you said about casting and making these guys better that fish with. So you guide throughout spring, summer, and fall. Man, it's been a weird year this year. Have you picked up a few trips here this spring and getting ready for summer?
I'm really fortunate. I mean, I have a couple local people that are trying to keep keep me busy a little bit. With the COVID thing, I mean, I think we're fortunate from a timing standpoint up here. You talk to your boys and talk to the guys down in Florida, and the captains down there, and they lost our equivalent of a July.
They lost their peak season, right?
Yeah, and it's starting to open up for them, and hopefully they get some of that back. So I have pushed late March and April fishing more, pre-runoff fishing, as a way to extend my own season up here, as a way to maybe not have to travel. Or I've never developed a second season, so I work 16 years in a fly shop as well. So that sort of security in the fall, winter months and spring months, good, bad, or indifferent, really sort of kept me from ever pursuing, a second guide season in another location. And I think, because of that, I've always looked at, some of our extra time is like October and April. I really don't push mid-May to mid-June. I'm kind of like, if you're here, we'll make something happen. We've got Hebgen Lake, we've got Harrison, we can do some things like that. But it's like, it's runoff. Like, don't travel here to fish the river first week of June. Like, it's just a bad, I mean, unless it's a drought year, we're looking at a year 2006, 7, something like that. We're low snowpack, like no runoff for all intents and purposes. Salmon flies are done by mid-June. Like, at that point, we can see the writing on the wall. Like, yeah, come anytime, right? Because it's, except August on those years. The last 2 years, like, you want to be here in August for sure. And then next year that goes out the window. But that whole sort of early thing, it's kind of, I don't know where I was going. I'm sort of lost my train of thought on that one. But
it's just about keeping busy during this time.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're faring okay. And summer's looking good, and things are starting to relax. I'm ready to get things back to normal. And
I think a lot of people are ready to work. I mean, I think all of us, everyone saw cancellations through March and April that had them. I've got cancellations into June and July, and that's people thinking, being safe for themselves. What are we going to do? So
I just think it's so advantageous. I think, like, even sitting down here with you for an hour, I've picked up so many tips and tidbits. You've just spent your life on the water learning how to fish to these fish and paying your dues. And so for these guys that are coming out west or coming to Montana to go fly fishing, like, just to book a day with you, you pick up so much insight. You pick up what's fishing good that time of year, where the fish are laying. And so, even if you just pick up a guide day and then you've got a few days on your own, you're going to do so much better than you would just coming out, hitting it when you're really green and haven't paid your dues, because this river can be a butt kicker if you don't know it real well or know it inside and out. So I know
it pretty well. It's still a butt kicker. It's still very much.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, and that's fishing. This river is one of those things. So I'm a very Madison-centric guide. Like, it's hard enough to know any river really well, let alone 5 or 6. Like, and I'm fairly fishy. I feel comfortable going other places. I love the big hole. I don't guide it that much. I really like the Missouri. When it comes to it, like, I'm here because this is where I fish. This is what I know. And I'm with my customers that might do some adventure stuff, it's like if we've got 4 or 5 days, I got no problem going somewhere else. But if you're here for 2 days and you want to go to the Yellowstone, like, I'm going to give you the honest answer about it. You should probably hire someone who's on the Yellowstone for 100 days a year or more, right? Like, if you want to fish the Madison, like, I'll go over and fish the Yellowstone. We'll have a great time, and we'll find fish because they're trout, right? They hold in different places a little bit. But so I've always kind of had a little bit of that mentality, and I love other water. But, yeah, this is definitely the place I'm like, a lot of folks like to adventure. Like, I know I got a lot of guide buddies who are like, oh, I can't believe you would run Mac to Varney 12 days in a row. And I'm like, I have Mac to Varney so dialed. Like, I know where and when and what fish we're going to see on what bugs. And I don't like change. Like, I love the consistency of this river, right? So if I can run that single fly or those same 2 flies for 12 days in a row, sign me up. Like, I'm in there every day. And then it starts to change and you move around, or it's a different schedule. Someone's got to be off early. So it's just all of a sudden that little pattern we have gets thrown out the window. But I'm definitely a Madison-centric guide in that respect. Like, I love fishing other places because it's an experience thing. We need that as anglers. But I love getting patterns developed here. Not fly patterns, but fishing patterns.
Yeah,
and
right.
I follow that from a bass fishing standpoint. I think, sometimes we don't look at the bass fishing world enough when we're trout fishing, because it's fishing. It's like hunting. It's things like edges, things like certain things at certain times and certain seasons.
It transposes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so developing those patterns, just like pro bass anglers might for docks or this or that or submerged structure, I found that to be one of the most helpful things for me here. And that was taught to me, by, again, really good, guides. I mean, guys like Scully, Mike Green, the Francis, Leon, God rest his soul. Those guys all,
all great guys too.
Yeah, and they happen to be guys. We start talking about that. Annie Shore's another one, right? We start talking about not the guys, but those guides in general were like, pay attention to where you see these things happening, right? Because that spot will hold that type of fish. It may not hold that fish because you caught that fish one day, but the next day, the next prime fish will be in that spot. And so there's those kind of things that I think it takes being in it a while. Like, we learn the how, like, get the boat going safely, park, get in, A to B, get some people some fish. And then there's just all those things that we end up learning, from the folks before us. So I'm super fortunate to have been here, been able to learn that from them. But kind of touching on what you said about the guide thing, where, the learning curve, sometimes I think we mix up learning curve, like steep and shallow. Like, the fly fishing learning curve is very flat and long and
it is
rough.
It?
It's hard. I don't want to discourage anybody. Do it, try it, just stick with it. My early memories of fly fishing in Southern California, after I first started to learn to cast, after I met one of my mentors who kind of got me up here, my early memories of fly fishing are literally sitting on the bank on a creek trying to figure out how to untangle something or re-rig it just to get it hung up in a tree again or tangled again. Like, I don't remember catching that many fish, like, in those really early days of that. I remember the fish that kind of got me cemented here, which was salmon fly fishing in '96. I was here for 2 days and in the park, but I hooked one big rainbow, and it was probably only a 17 or 18 inch fish, but it just cartwheeled and ran up river and did all this stuff and ran around a rock and seemed like it was, a giant. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can dig on that for a long time. So that was the moment that kind of cemented Montana for me. But that learning curve thing, we can steepen the learning curve. I mean, guides, like, you don't need to go 5 days. Like, there's a lot of great self-fishing on the Madison. I mean, it's one of the, that and the Montana Stream Access Law, all the other rivers we have around. There's a ton folks can do, and not have to do a guide every day, right? But if we do it on the front end, just like going to salt or just like going to a bass lake or anything else, those rigs that we use here, they work on the big hole, right? Those rigs work everywhere. The bugs might change and there's some seasonality difference, but a big dry and a 3 foot to 4 foot dropper, like, that works, right? Or a shallow dropper for fishing shallow stuff. And so steepening that learning curve, I think, can be really helpful for that person
super beneficial,
who can who wants to do it that way, wants to do more on their own.
Well,
sure.
And two, I just think how fun it is to fish out of the front of the boat going down a Montana river. Like, that is like us as fishing, like, you guide a lot of days, you're on the oars a lot of days, and you enjoy it. You're fishing through your people, and you want to see fish. You get them to the net. It's a group experience. You're a team. But there's something special that being in the front of that boat and getting to cast at that shoreline and under those sticks and twigs and fish that thing aggressively like you want to and mend in the right spot and getting it. Like, that is just as fun as it gets. So if you're traveling to Montana and you don't have a drift boat and buddies and the whole deal, like, to pay a guide day for a day or two to be out to Montana to fit into your vacation, it's well worth every dollar you're going to spend, Like, I'd pay the money just to be in the front of the drift boat of some of my best buddies rowing me down the river, because you guys are so in tune, not only with the river and the skills and the casting, but also the lines going down the river and where the fish sit and where they hold. And so, I just know that if I book with you for a day or two, like, I am going to get the most killer Montana fly fishing experience that I can fit into 2 days or whatever it is, 3 days or into 5 days or whatever it is. So, yeah, I just
as an angler, everyone should fish a drift boat. Every fly fisher person should at some point drift a big Western River out of a drift boat.
It's so fun.
I mean, I'm biased for sure. If you're going to do it on the Madison, right? Come do it with us, right? But seriously, do it wherever you can. Like, that experience is, even if it's something that we don't do or continue to do, and there's pluses and minuses, drift boat fishing is kind of run and gun. It's, I can sit and hold a boat. I row hard, right? I learned that a long time ago, but we might only get a shot or two at a spot. That's okay, right? Let that go. If you missed it, just let it go. There's another one coming. Look downstream. There's another one coming. But, like, wade fishing is so intimate, right? Yeah. It's slower. We can stop and watch and observe better. So there's pluses and minuses to both of it. And I find, like, a lot of times when I'm fishing on my own, or I do want to go on my own, I go by myself because I like the solitude of it. But I do love fishing with buddies. Drift boat fishing's great. And everybody should try it at some point.
It's
sure,
just so fun too.
It's a great way to experience big water,
isn't it? You just get so many good looks at the bank too, going down, and then you're working together too. You got the oarsman that's working with you to put you in the right spots for the right cast, which you really know the difference when you get in a boat with somebody that hasn't oared a whole lot. You can hardly reach the spots that you need to get to catch the fish. Like, a lot of times, I'd almost rather be oaring than fishing out of the front with somebody that doesn't oar all the time. It's just tough. I can't get the lines. I can't get the drifts. I can't get the cast. I know we're going to do better if I'm just behind the sticks and can pull hard on those oars and get them to the right spots.
That's always a tough one. I find that when I go with folks who are beginning rowing, I just do what I would do if I was fishing someone. So I just take my cast and make it 30 feet. I don't try to stretch it to 60 or 70 or reach some odd rock.
Okay.
One thing I find when I do this, now I start finding new spots too. So,
wow.
I mean.
That's probably a mistake that I still make. I'm still trying to cast 60 feet and miss every fish that comes up for me. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, and that's why not, right? It's like, if that's what a guy wants to do, that person should do that. But I found that we fish the middle a lot, right? There's so much middle fishing on this river. that it's like, just get the boat down safely. Like, learn to park, learn to get out. If you want to go to a rock or go to an area, go that way. It doesn't matter if we really get there. Positioning, boat positioning, all that stuff. It's like, there's similar, I think, things that we see in that I saw when I was learning to fly fish. I had times where I'm perfectly safe in the boat, but then I actually get a chance to fish with someone who's been rowing dry fly anglers for their whole life, right, or their whole adult life. And they'll point out something that I do, and I didn't necessarily pick up on it, and I'm 8-9 years in at this point, and I'm like, I just got a revolutionary tip, right? One of those things was like, sometimes we overrun where we're going to, so then we have to pull away. Or say my front angler makes a cast to a rock, I crab stroke a lot. So there's a French term for it that I can't. It's an old canoe paddling thing where we're pushing water under the bow and then we're backstroking on the other oar. So we can move the boat left or right.
Without twisting the boat in the river, right? Sculling or...
Yeah, that's similar. And there, again, the French term for it, I'm blanking on it. But it's a way to do a canoeing maneuver too.
Okay.
And so I can move the boat to the right or left without actually pushing one angler closer and pulling one angler further away. That was a revolutionary moment for me, after being a really stubborn dry fly guide in my early years when I probably shouldn't have been a stubborn dry fly guide. I'm like, how come you can't? Because my buddies would feel the boat start to pull away from a rock. Well, and they feed a little slack to it. Well, most of our anglers, they don't feel those tiny movements like that and can adjust to them. And we start to do it unconsciously. And so then it was frustrating. Like, why is, like, your fly is dragging? We just put it there. And, my buddy Mike is like, well, you're doing that. You're killing their float every time. You just ruined his drift or her drift, right? You worked so hard to get it there, and then you pulled the bow of the boat away. And they don't know that that's happening. They can't feel that boat moving 3 or 4 feet, which then drags the fly. And so from that oars person, that kind of on the stick side of things, I love rowing. Like, I feel like that is one of the best things for my fly fishing was becoming a much, much better rower for sure. And those details about rowing and about how we affect our anglers' drifts and things. And so there's things like that you're like, oh man, I'm doing pretty good. I'm 8-9 years in. I'm busy. I know a lot. And then it's like, well, that little thing. Like, have you ever wondered why your client's fly drags and sinks like right at the most inopportune time? And then I go, no. And so then I look back, well, for 10 years, I've been messing that client's drift up,
It's so insightful. But it's just continuing to learn and pay attention and learn from other guys. I learned so much just going down on a boat and watching somebody good fish. It's amazing when you get a good angler in the front of the boat. And then it's like an art form. All anglers are different. You get different anglers in the front, and you pick up different tips from different guys that are fishing. And some guys, They fish almost better than my oaring, sometimes, just the way they can reach things and, like you say, feel the boat moving and feed it some slack so they get the drift in and through there. And it really equals a lot more fish in the end. But, man, Brian.
Well, and some of that is talking through. So if I'm going to pull the boat away, I will tell the person exactly what I'm about to do. So I chatter a ton, right? So, I mean, you might have picked up on that a little bit, but so my entire day is spent describing and talking about what my next move is. So if I'm quiet in the boat, and I tell people this, and this is all just learning to guide. If I'm quiet, I'm like, don't mind me. It's perfect. I like it. It's where it needs to be. You're seeing the water that we're trying to throw at. So if you hear me pretty quiet for a few minutes, I just like everything that I'm looking at, so I'm okay. But otherwise, I will say, especially for beginners, I'll say, hey, when we're going towards your flies, I'll let them know that I'm now moving the boat towards their flies, right? And so we're going to create the slack. I'm the one now generating the slack in their line. So it's okay to strip a little bit if we look down at that line. Vice versa, going away from it. I'm going to start pulling you slightly away if you can wiggle a little line out of the tip of the rod, the fly might stay there for a minute. So I'm always chattering and talking about those things. And a lot of that is just to get people comfortable with that, the way the boat moves. Like the boat's going to do something. It's going to be me that does it, and it's either going to mess it up for you or it's going to help. But if I talk about it and we describe it and things like that, then I'm maybe helping more than I'm hindering, like the early days. So,
man, I like it. Well, and just going down, having a good fisherman describe what he's looking for. And everybody's kind of looking to fish a little bit different water sometimes too.
Yeah.
And just like you stated, I don't know if we said this on the podcast or before the podcast, but you talked about fishing the way your buddy would fish his clients, or fishing the way his clients would fish. And I think that's so insightful going down. You were talking about
that was
pre-fishing for one of your buddies that has a client coming up. And so you were in the front of the boat fishing. And so you told him, fish me like you'd fish your clients. Wherever you want me to throw it, however you want me to fish it, that's how I'll fish it, because that's going to give you a higher knowledge or higher understanding of what's going on. But I'm the same way fishing down with buddies. Is when you're rowing the boat, you want to see the fly where you want to see it, or where you're trying to put the boat in the right spot. And if they end up eating in a different spot, or you see the water different, that we'll deal with that. That's fine. But I think that chatter and that conversation and talking back and forth what seams are and what slow water is and fast water and around the rocks, shoulders and the heads like you described.
Well,
that's
the
so
language,
important.
Right?
Yeah, language.
We have a language that people are walking into, and it'd be like me walking into a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown. Like, I don't speak Chinese, right? And so I need someone to interpret, right? This is this. This is this is that. And so it's like almost any foreign language for us, right? If I don't speak Spanish, so someone's got to tell me what the bathroom is, right? And I mean, I speak, terrible broken Spanish, but so I think it's easy for us to forget that. I think folks can sometimes feel a bit lost. They can feel overwhelmed. Like, it's easy to talk too much to people and just like let them work through it a little bit. Like, they don't need me yelling at them to, like, your cast is terrible. They need me to give them a constructive tip to make the cast not terrible, right?
And it isn't micromanaging every little thing they're doing wrong. It's picking the biggest thing and telling them that to focus on, giving them one thing to focus on.
Totally. I mean, like the cast, it's like if I can stop the rod a little earlier in the back cast, that might just change the entire cast enough that it's serviceable, from here to eternity now. And then we can focus on maybe working on it more if that's something they want to do. But we can make a single adjustment oftentimes and kind of help them out. And and then again, just kind of letting them go through. Like, I'll if a fly looks like it's going to be in the right spot, I'm seeing it through the air. I'll actually say before it's even landed, just leave it, just leave it. And then nothing happens. But like, it was a great drift, good float, it was in kind of the right area. Next time we'll try this, right? And so many times as anglers, we want to pick it up and move it again. And it does need to drift over the spot. It can't oftentimes land in the spot, and so there's just all those little details, like talking about, so if the fish are eating on a ledge that's perpendicular to the current, so I would call that like a step. It's a shelf, or it's anything that sort of denotes some kind of drop to deeper water from shallower water that crosses the current. I kind of call, things that run parallel to the current sort of troughs or stuff like that, depending on the shape of it. But again, that's that language. If I say, we have to drift over the ledge, I mean, who knows what that means, right? Unless I describe what it is we're looking at. So, at this spot, it goes from seeing cobble to green. We're looking through more water. That's the depth change. We'd like to drift across that transition. That's clearer language. And unless we talk about that and kind of bring it to some common language, I'm just yelling at somebody to not break their wrist. They don't know what that means. Like, what's breaking our wrist, right? Or what's the ledge, or what's the shoulder, or and so I find that, like, one thing for me was really getting to the point where we get rid of our language. Like, we got to bring these people, either teach them how to speak our language, or talk in not that foreign language of fly fishing talk. So that was another sort of big thing.
It's really smart. Yeah. That's really intuitive. because you're right. You just start talking the lingo, and they have no idea. It's 20 years of lingo of fishing with a bunch of different fly fishermen, and you know exactly what it means when you say it. It all makes sense, but to somebody else, they have to pick up on the lingo. That's really smart.
Like head of the rock. I mean, we have to describe what the head of the rock is. Is the head of the rock the upstream side? So then it's like, okay, well, you can, if I'm going to say throw above the rock, and I try to be consistent. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, but I'm like, above is always upstream, ahead of, on the upriver side of a rock. So if we talk about above or in front of or anything like that, that just means this side of it, and we can point that out. So it's all those little things that just, they build on themselves, year after year. And then we can take them and practice with them. So we can take analogies, we can take all that stuff and descriptive terms and kind of, and run with them and then develop better words even. So, yeah.
The lingo's fun though, isn't it?
Oh, there's so much stuff. I try not to keep up with it. I'm so old school, like in that sense. I'm like, fly, I don't know. Cause I'm like, I have a hard time keeping up with it. And it's fun cause it's people should be making it for themselves, right? They don't need to. Tradition and history is very good. We should all keep 1 foot rooted in some tradition and history, but it's totally, absolutely okay for someone to call a brown trout like a slab of butter if they want. I don't care. Like, it's one of those things. It's
There's
like
such a bro lingo that goes on, but it's so
fun. If I'm
going
to harsh on someone for like that being good part of their day, it's so ridiculous. Like, why would I ever do that? Like, I'm calling a brown trout. It's a big ass brown trout. Like but that's just me. Like, I'm kind of the old gray guy these days. So getting there anyway.
Oh man, the years go by quick, don't they? We're around
really
the
do.
same age, and it's amazing that I've known you for 20 years fishing in this valley. But dude, I could talk to you all day, all night long on the podcast.
Yeah.
That was so fun, man.
We're stretching well past our time. You got some editing to do.
You got to come back on. There's no editing. It's all great information. But thanks so much for sharing so much
absolutely
insight, and you've just been doing it for so long. So guys can follow you, Montana Fishman, on IG, right?
Instagram at Montana Fishman, Facebook, a very inactive Twitter account, but and then montanafishman.com.
Okay, is that where guys should get a hold of you to book trips or look into summer trips?
Yeah, so phone number, emails there. You can just comment right through. Wonderfully inactive blog and a moderately accurate river report here and there, some ranting, all that good stuff. I love talking shop, so I'm easy to just, sit on the phone with for a half hour, and if anybody wants information, that kind of stuff too. So, I appreciate you having me. Thanks. It's been fun. I feel like I'm maybe not as nervous as I thought I would be going into it all. So,
dude, you killed it.
Thank you.
Just so much great knowledge. I picked up so much from the conversation. So I know I took you long here, but thanks so much, Brian. Man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's sort of, for me, it comes back around to, so much of it was shared with me. Like I always comment, like, I'm a tracer, right? I'm just taking what people did before me and running with it. So if I can't give that back to people who don't know it yet, I'm not doing my job. Someone gave it to me, so I've got to feel like I can get that stuff to the next person. So
well, I really appreciate it. I know our audience will too. So
thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You have to come back on.
Yeah, love to come back for sure. Yeah, talk any kind of shop for sure.
Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, man, what a great conversation. What a great guy. Really enjoyed getting together with Brian and chatting. It's just amazing what you can pick up from a conversation. I've learned so much in the first 11 episodes of this podcast already, and just going to continue on my own journey. I had so much fun. I went down Saturday. I'm going to line up a podcast. I fished with somebody new, and man, just teaching me what he knows about hunting heads and about that river system down there. Just had an incredible day down there. Caught a few off the dry fly, and just a great time. It's just this fly fishing is so fun. There's so many adventures to be had. It's the working class, we're just so short on time trying to make the best of it. Evenings and weekends and time off and things. And I'm definitely trying to do the best I can. But yeah, I just love this fly fishing journey. Thanks for Brian coming on. Montana Fishman, check out his Facebook, IG. He's a great follow. It's so informative on his IG. I learned so much. He talks leaders, talks flows, talks hatches. Just runs an amazing social media, but so much knowledge there. I want to get out and fish with Brian as well. Anytime I get to fish with these really good, knowledgeable guys, it just seems like I pick up so much. So thanks to him for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. Thanks to you guys for listening. You guys are the reason why this podcast goes. We need an audience and need people listening to make this thing all work. So I really appreciate it. I'm just going to continue to try to bring you the best guests, best information I can, and continue to be fired up about fishing each and every day. So I'm actually going to go today. It's 11 o'clock in the a.m. now. I'm getting out both podcasts, got to get out a construction bill, and going to sneak out for the afternoon. Rivers are high and muddy right now. The Madison is so big. But I think I can sneak over to one of those smaller rivers over the hill there and see if I can't get into some fish. It's pretty high water there. You can't even wade that stuff. I was over there Friday. I turned a couple fish, caught one on the streamer, but yeah, I may go work that water today. So looking forward to it. Podcast is really fun. Thanks for the support. The downloads mean everything. Just listening to the podcast and liking it, sharing it with friends, subscribe to it, rate the podcast really helps. The follow on the Instagram, all that stuff. So I appreciate it, guys. Good fish and tight lines. Check in with you next week.